When I went to live with my son, I didn't tell him a thing about the $27 million I inherited from my husband. Thank God I kept my mouth shut, because just days later, his wife showed up with a lawyer, and I realized they wanted to rob me of everything. But what they didn't know was that this old woman had lived far too long to be fooled by two shameless vultures who thought they could take advantage of me. It all began when they kicked me out of my own house. Yes, you heard that right. After 40 years of living in that home, after raising my children there, after caring for my husband until his last breath, my son Daniel and his wife Chloe arrived with fake smiles and told me it was for my own good to move in with them. That a 65-year-old woman shouldn't live alone. That they wanted to take care of me in my golden years. Liars. What they wanted was to have me under their roof so they could manipulate me better. But me, playing the part of the foolish old woman they thought I was, I said yes. I even thanked them. I told them they were so good to me. Because you see, when you get to my age, you learn that sometimes it's better to let them think you're clueless. It's better that they see you as a poor, confused old lady who doesn't understand a thing about what's happening around her. But the truth is, I understood everything. I understood why Chloe was so insistent that I come live with them right after my husband's funeral. I understood why they had suddenly become so affectionate towards me. I understood why Daniel, who barely visited once a month when his father was alive, now showed up every day, worried about my well-being. What they didn't understand was that I had changed. That my husband's death had not only left me a widow, but it had also left me with something else. Something neither of them could have ever imagined. Because my husband, that quiet man who worked at an import-export business, had kept a secret for all these years. A $27 million secret that only I knew about now. When the lawyer called me 3 weeks after the funeral, I thought it was a prank. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said over the phone, "your husband left very specific instructions. There is a Swiss bank account that only you can access. The documents are in a safe deposit box that opens only with your fingerprint." At first, I didn't believe him. How was it possible that my husband had so much money hidden away? How could he have never said a word? But when I went to the bank and saw the numbers on that screen, when I saw all those accounts in my name, when I realized I was a millionaire and nobody else knew, I understood why my husband had kept the secret. I understood that he was protecting me, that he knew if the family found out, they would see me as a prize to be won instead of a person. And he was right. Because as soon as I moved in with Daniel and Chloe, they began to show their true colors. Chloe, with her flashy red dresses and her always perfect nails, started talking to me as if I were a little girl. "Eleanor, don't you worry about money. We'll take care of everything," she'd say while rummaging through my purse looking for my checkbook. "Eleanor, you don't need to handle these complicated things anymore. Just leave it to us." Daniel was no better. My own son, the child I had carried in my womb for 9 months, whom I had raised with so much love, now spoke to me as if I were a burden. "Mom, you have to understand that things have changed. Dad isn't here to take care of you anymore. Now it's Chloe and me who have to look after you." As if I were a piece of furniture to be stored in the attic. But I let them believe I was confused. I let them believe I didn't understand what was happening. I played the part of the absent-minded old woman who didn't even know how to use a smartphone. I pretended I couldn't remember where I'd put my important papers. I acted as if I needed help to understand the most basic things. Because while they thought they were playing me for a fool, I was watching. I was learning. I was preparing myself for what I knew was coming. And what was coming was much worse than I had imagined. The first week living with them was like being in a badly acted play. Chloe would get up every morning and get ready as if she were going to a party, with her bright green dresses and her high heels that clicked through the house like gunshots. She would put on her makeup in front of the dining room mirror while I ate breakfast, talking to me as if I were deaf. "Eleanor, dear, today we're going to the bank to sort out some little papers for your account, okay? It's boring stuff, but necessary." I would nod with my confused old lady face, but inside, I was taking mental notes of every word, every gesture, every lie that came out of her red-painted mouth. Because Chloe didn't know that I had been married to a businessman for 40 years. She didn't know I had seen thousands of contracts, that I had been present at dinners where multi-million-dollar deals were closed, that I had learned to spot a con artist from a mile away. Daniel was more subtle, but no less obvious. My son had inherited his father's caution, but not his intelligence. He would approach me with that fake smile he had perfected since childhood whenever he wanted something. "Mom, do you remember where Dad kept the important documents? Chloe and I want to help you get everything organized, but we need to know what papers you have." As if I were foolish enough not to understand they were looking for my assets. The problem was, they didn't know I had nothing to organize. My official assets were a savings account with $12,000 and the house where I had lived for 40 years. That was all that appeared on any documents they could find. The $27 million were so well hidden that not even the best private investigator could have found them without the keys that only I possessed. But they didn't know that, and I had no intention of telling them, because every day that passed, every conversation I had with them, every glance they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking, confirmed that I had made the right decision. These two snakes didn't deserve a single cent of what my husband had worked so hard to build. The second week was when they started to apply pressure. Chloe came into my room early one morning, without knocking, carrying a breakfast tray and that smile I had grown to hate. "Eleanor, my love, I brought you your favorite breakfast." It was not my favorite breakfast. It was watery oatmeal with mushy fruit. But I smiled and thanked her, as if she had brought me a feast. "You know, Eleanor," she said, sitting on my bed without permission, "Daniel and I have been thinking about your future. A woman your age needs security. She needs to know that someone will take care of her when she can no longer care for herself." Her eyes shone with a greed that made me sick to my stomach. "We spoke with a lawyer friend of ours, Mr. Price, and he says it would be a very good idea for you to make a will. You know, just to get everything in order." There it was, the opening move. The first play in the chess game they thought they were playing with me. But what they didn't know was that I had been playing chess long before they were even born. "A will?" I asked in a trembling voice, pretending to be overwhelmed. "But I don't have anything important to leave." "Oh, Eleanor, don't say that," Chloe cooed in that phony voice she used for manipulation. "You have the house, you have your savings, you have valuable things. It's important that everything is legal, that someone responsible takes care of your things when you're no longer here. Someone responsible." As if she and Daniel were the definition of responsibility. That afternoon, when they thought I was taking a nap, I heard them talking in the kitchen. Their voices carried clearly to my room, and every word was like a nail in the coffin of my trust for them. "It has to be soon," Chloe was saying. "We can't wait for her to die of natural causes. We need her to sign those papers before someone else gets involved." "What if she doesn't want to sign?" Daniel asked with that scared little boy voice he'd had his whole life. "We can't force her." "Of course we can," Chloe replied with a coldness that chilled my blood. "Your mother is old. She's confused. She's vulnerable. The lawyer, Price, knows how to handle these cases. He can certify that she isn't in a condition to make her own decisions, that she needs a legal guardian." "And who would be the guardian?" Daniel asked. "Us, obviously," Chloe shot back as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "We're her family. We're the only ones who care about her. And once we're her legal guardians, we can do whatever we want with her assets." There was the entire plan. They wanted to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could steal everything they thought I had. They wanted to use my age and my supposed confusion to get their hands on my house, my savings, everything that was mine. They didn't know that what I really had was far more than they could have imagined in their wildest dreams. But they also knew that what they were planning was cruel. It was heartless. It was exactly the kind of abuse that thousands of seniors suffer every day at the hands of their own families. And that hurt me more than anything else. It wasn't just that they wanted to rob me. It was that they were willing to destroy my dignity, my autonomy, my right to make my own decisions, just to get money they didn't even need. Because, you see, Daniel had a good job. Chloe worked too, although she spent more time spending than earning. They lived in a nice house, had 2 cars, and took vacations twice a year. They weren't financially desperate. They were just greedy. They simply thought they deserved more than they had, and I was the easy way to get it. That night, alone in my room, I took out the cell phone I had hidden in my purse. Yes, I had a cell phone. Yes, I knew how to use it perfectly. Another one of the lies I'd led them to believe was that I didn't understand modern technology. But the truth was, my husband had taught me how to use all these things years before he died. Eleanor, he had told me, the world is changing. You have to learn how to navigate it if you want to survive. I dialed the number my husband's lawyer, Arthur Vance, had given me, a serious, professional man who had handled my husband's business for over 20 years. When he answered, I explained the situation in a low voice. "Mr. Vance," I said, "I need your help. My family is trying to rob me, and I think they're going to try to have me declared mentally incompetent." "Mrs. Eleanor," he replied in a voice that conveyed calm, "don't you worry. Tomorrow morning, I will begin preparing everything necessary to protect you, but I need you to keep acting as if you know nothing. I need you to let them think their plan is working." "Why?" I asked. "Because we are going to set a trap," he answered. "A trap that will not only protect you but will also ensure they pay for what they are trying to do." The next day, Arthur arrived at the house disguised as an insurance agent. Chloe greeted him at the door with that fake smile she reserved for strangers. "Good morning, ma'am," he said in a professional tone. "I'm here to speak with Mrs. Eleanor about a life insurance policy her late husband took out some years ago. There are some benefits she may be able to claim." Chloe practically drooled when she heard the words benefits and money. "Oh, how wonderful," she exclaimed with an excitement she couldn't hide. "Eleanor is here, but she's been a bit confused lately. Perhaps it would be better if you spoke with me. I'm her daughter-in-law, and I'm helping her with all her financial affairs." Arthur glanced at me with an expression only I could interpret. "Of course, ma'am, but the law requires that I speak directly with the beneficiary. It's just a few routine questions." Chloe had no choice but to call me over, but she stood beside us the entire time, trying to hear every word. "Mrs. Eleanor," Arthur said, his voice just loud enough for Chloe to hear, "according to our records, you may be entitled to claim a payout from your husband's policy, but I need you to sign a few documents to process the claim." Chloe practically jumped with excitement. In her greedy mind, she was already spending money she didn't even know existed. But what was really happening was that Arthur was handing me completely different documents. Documents that protected me legally. Documents that established I was of sound mind. Documents that appointed Arthur as my legal representative in case anyone tried to have me declared incompetent. All of this while Chloe thought she was witnessing a golden opportunity to steal more money. "How much money could it be?" Chloe asked, unable to contain herself. Her greed was so transparent it was embarrassing. "Well," Arthur replied with a smile I recognized as dangerous, "it depends on several factors. We could be talking about a considerable sum. But first, we need to verify that Mrs. Eleanor is in a condition to make financial decisions for herself." That's when Chloe made her first big mistake. "Oh, but Eleanor is perfectly fine," she said quickly. "She can make her own decisions. Right, Eleanor?" She had completely contradicted herself. She had just affirmed that I was of sound mind, right after she had been planning to have me declared incompetent. Arthur left that day, leaving Chloe more excited than ever. But he also left me with a small recording device that looked like a hearing aid. "Mrs. Eleanor," he had whispered while pretending to review my documents, "this device will record everything they say near you. Keep it on at all times. We're going to need evidence of everything they're planning." That night at dinner, Chloe couldn't stop talking about the insurance. "Eleanor, you're so lucky," she said while cutting her steak with an aggression that made me think she was picturing something else. "Your husband really cared for you. Although, of course, managing so much money can be complicated for a person your age. Maybe we should help you with that, too." Daniel nodded like the puppet he was. "Mom, Chloe's right. We can help you invest that money, make sure it's well taken care of." As if either of them knew a thing about investing. As if either of them had worked an honest day in their lives. "I don't know," I replied in my most fragile voice. "It's a lot of money. I'm not sure I can handle it alone." Of course, that was a lie. I had managed our household finances for 40 years. I had helped my husband with his business. I knew more about money than these two good-for-nothings combined. "Exactly," Chloe said triumphantly. "That's why you need our help. That's why you need someone responsible to take care of these things for you." There was that word again. Responsible. As if robbing an old woman was the height of responsibility. But what truly bothered me wasn't just their plan. It was the way they talked to me. It was the way they treated me like a little girl who didn't understand anything. It was the way they had decided that my life, my money, my decisions, now belonged to them simply because I had gotten older. Because you see, aging isn't just a physical process, it's also a social one. Society decides that when you reach a certain age, you're no longer a whole person. You no longer have the right to make your own decisions. You no longer have a right to your privacy, your dignity, your autonomy, and family is often the first to treat you like an object instead of a person. But I wasn't just any old woman. I was Eleanor, a woman who had raised 3 children, who had built a home, who had worked side by side with her husband to create a prosperous life. I was a woman who had learned to read people, to detect their lies, to protect herself from their manipulations. And now, I was a woman with 27 million hidden dollars and the determination to use them to teach these 2 parasites a lesson. The next day, Chloe announced she had made an appointment with her lawyer friend. "Eleanor, darling," she said in that sickly sweet voice she had perfected, "Mr. Price wants to meet you. He's going to help us organize all your legal papers. You know, just to get everything in order." Gregory Price turned out to be exactly what I expected, a man in his 50s with a cheap suit and a shark smile. He had that way of speaking that tried to be professional but couldn't hide his lack of ethics. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said when he arrived at the house, "it's a pleasure to meet you. Chloe has told me so much about you." I'm sure she has. I'm sure Chloe had told him exactly what he needed to know to do his dirty work. That I was a confused old woman with some money they could legally steal. "Mrs. Eleanor," Price continued, pulling out a folder full of documents, "I've prepared some papers that will simplify your life greatly. A power of attorney that allows your family to handle your financial affairs when you are unable to. A will that ensures your assets go to the people who have truly cared for you. And a few other documents that protect your future. Protect your future, as if robbing me was a form of protection. But I had been preparing for this moment. Arthur had explained exactly what would happen and how I should react. "Mr. Price," I said in a trembling voice, "these documents are very complicated. I'm not sure I understand them completely." "Don't you worry, ma'am," he replied with a condescension that made me want to throw up. "I'll explain everything. Basically, these papers say that if you become ill or confused, Daniel and Chloe can make decisions for you. It's very common for people your age. People my age. As if being 65 was an intellectual death sentence. But I continued to feign confusion. What if I don't want them to make decisions for me? What if I can still think for myself?" Price exchanged a look with Chloe, a look that said, "This old lady is being more difficult than we thought." "Mrs. Eleanor," he said with forced patience, "no one is saying you can't think. But it's important to be realistic. Age brings changes, and it's better to be prepared for those changes. Age brings changes. Yes, it does. But it also brings wisdom. It also brings experience. It also brings the ability to see through the lies of people like him." "And if I don't want to sign?" I asked. The silence that followed was deafening. Chloe stiffened. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Price adjusted his tie. Because there it was, the question they didn't want me to ask. The question that revealed I might not be as easy to manipulate as they had thought. "Well," Price finally said, "you have the right not to sign. But I must warn you that if you don't take these precautions now, it could be more difficult to protect you later. If one day you do become confused, a judge might have to make these decisions for you. A threat, clear and direct. Sign these papers voluntarily, or we'll have them signed for you involuntarily." But I smiled my most innocent smile. "Well, if it's what's best for me, I suppose I should sign. But I'd like to read everything over first. Can I take a few days to think about it?" Price didn't look happy, but he had no choice. "Of course, ma'am, take all the time you need. But remember, these documents are designed to protect you." Protect me, the most dishonest word I had heard in my life. That night, after Price had left, Chloe and Daniel followed me to my room. They didn't knock, they just walked in as if it were their right, as if my privacy no longer existed. Chloe sat on my bed without permission, while Daniel stood by the door like a guard. "Eleanor," Chloe began in that tone she used when she wanted to seem maternal, but which sounded more like a snake pretending to be a dove. "We need to have a serious talk with you. Daniel and I, are very worried about you." "Worried about what?" I asked, feigning innocence while Arthur's little device recorded every word. "About your behavior," Daniel answered, finally showing some backbone, even if it was for something so cowardly. "Lately, you've been different, more suspicious, more resistant to getting help. Resistant to getting help. As if refusing to be robbed was a mental illness." "I don't understand," I mumbled, perfecting my confused old woman act. "I just want to be sure of what I'm signing. Is that wrong?" Chloe leaned towards me, and I could smell her cheap perfume mixed with desperation. "Eleanor, dear, sometimes when people get older, they become paranoid. They start to distrust even their own family. It's normal, but it's also dangerous." Paranoid, that was the new word they were going to use to describe me. First confused, now paranoid. They were building their case step by step. "The doctor we know could help you," Chloe continued. "He could give you something to make you feel calmer, more trusting. And in the meantime, we can take care of all these complicated things that are stressing you out." A doctor they knew. Medication to calm me. They were threatening to drug me to make me more manageable. The sheer level of their wickedness left me speechless for a moment. "I don't feel stressed," I finally managed to say. "I just want to understand what I'm signing." "Mom," Daniel said with that frustrated child's voice he'd used his whole life when he didn't get his way, "you can't keep being so distrustful. We're your family. All we want is to take care of you. Take care of me. If that was their way of caring, I'd rather they openly hated me." "All right," I sighed, as if giving in. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I am being too suspicious." I saw their eyes light up with greed. "But I'd still like to read the documents one more time before I sign, just to be sure." "Of course," Chloe said quickly. "Take all the time you need, but remember, Mr. Price is a very busy man. We can't keep him waiting too long." After they left my room, I sat in the darkness, processing what had just happened. They didn't just want to rob me, they wanted to drug me. They wanted to declare me mentally incompetent. They wanted to completely destroy my autonomy as a human being, and all for money they didn't even know existed. The next day, while they thought I was napping, I heard another conversation in the kitchen. This time, their voices were more urgent, more desperate. "She's taking too long," Chloe said. "Price says the more time we give her to think, the more dangerous it is. Old people talk. She could tell someone about the documents." "So what do you suggest?" Daniel asked. "That we pressure her more. Make her feel guilty for not trusting us. And if that doesn't work?" There was a long pause. "Price knows a doctor who can certify that she's not fit to make decisions. We don't need her consent if a doctor says she's incapacitated." "But isn't that illegal?" Daniel asked in a voice that showed he knew perfectly well that it was. "Only if someone finds out?" Chloe replied with a coldness that made me tremble. "And who's going to find out? Eleanor doesn't have any other relatives who visit her. She doesn't have friends who come to see her. It's just us. And we're going to take very good care of her in her new condition. Her new condition. They wanted to make me a prisoner in my own life. They wanted to steal not only my money, but my freedom, my dignity, my right to exist as a whole person. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't as alone as they thought. Arthur had been very busy for the past few days. Not only had he prepared my legal defenses, but he had also hired a private investigator to follow Chloe and Price. What they had discovered was fascinating. It turned out this wasn't the first time Price had helped families manage the affairs of their elderly relatives. He had a pattern. He would find families with seniors who had some money and convince them they needed legal protection. Then, along with corrupt doctors, he would have the seniors declared incompetent and take a percentage of the stolen assets. Chloe wasn't so innocent either. Before marrying Daniel, she had been married to another older man. A man who had died mysteriously after signing a will that left everything to her. The official investigation had concluded it was natural causes, but the circumstances were suspicious. My daughter-in-law wasn't just a thief. She was potentially a murderer. That information changed everything. It was no longer just a matter of protecting my money. It was a matter of protecting my life. Arthur came to visit the next day, this time disguised as a government social worker. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said loudly as Chloe listened from the kitchen. "We're doing a routine check to ensure that the senior citizens in our area are receiving proper care." Chloe appeared immediately, her fakest smile plastered on her face. "How wonderful that the government cares so much about the elderly," she exclaimed. "Eleanor is very well cared for here. We make sure she has everything she needs." "Excellent," Arthur replied. "But I need to speak with Mrs. Eleanor alone. It's standard protocol. Just a few routine questions about her well-being." Chloe didn't look happy, but she couldn't refuse without looking suspicious. "Of course," she said through clenched teeth. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything." Once we were alone, Arthur spoke in a low voice, but loud enough for the recording device to capture everything. "Mrs. Eleanor, do you feel safe in this house? Has anyone pressured you to sign documents you don't understand? Has anyone threatened you in any way?" I responded in my clearest and strongest voice, establishing for the recording that I was completely lucid. "Yes, I feel pressured. My daughter-in-law and my son want me to sign documents that would take away my control over my own decisions. They have also threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent if I don't cooperate." "And do you consider yourself to be mentally competent?" Arthur asked. "Completely," I answered. "I can think for myself, I can make my own decisions, and I don't need anyone to control me." Chloe, who had obviously been listening from the kitchen, appeared at the door, her face a mask of panic. "Eleanor dear, I think you're confused. Nobody is pressuring you. We just want to help you." But Arthur ignored her completely. "Mrs. Eleanor, if you feel that you are being abused or manipulated, we have resources to help you. Would you like us to connect you with Adult Protective Services?" "Yes," I replied firmly. "I would like that very much." Chloe turned pale. Her perfect plan was crumbling right before her eyes, and there was nothing she could do to stop it without looking exactly like what she was, an abuser trying to silence her victim. But I knew this was only the beginning. Chloe wasn't going to give up that easily, and when desperate people feel cornered, they are capable of anything, even murder. That night, Chloe and Daniel didn't come to dinner. I heard them whispering in their room for hours, and though I couldn't make out all the words, the tone was one of pure desperation. Their perfect plan was falling apart, and they knew it. But what they didn't know was that I had been taking apart plans long before they were born. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I heard footsteps in the hallway, footsteps heading toward my room. I pretended to be asleep, but kept my eyes cracked open. Chloe slipped in silently, holding something in her hand. She approached my nightstand, where I kept my glass of water, and poured something into it, a white powder that dissolved immediately. My own daughter-in-law was trying to drug me, but I had been expecting exactly this. Arthur had warned me that when abusers feel cornered, they escalate their violence. He had given me placebo pills to swap for any medication they tried to give me, and had taught me how to feign the effects of drugs without actually being drugged. The next day, when they brought me breakfast with my special glass of water, I drank it all in front of them. I saw the satisfaction in Chloe's eyes as she thought her plan was working. Half an hour later, I began to act confused and drowsy. "Eleanor, are you feeling all right?" Chloe asked with a fake concern that nauseated me. "I feel strange," I mumbled, slurring my words, as if I were in a fog. "Oh, you poor thing," Chloe said, but her eyes were shining with triumph. "It must be the stress of all these legal matters. Why don't you get some more rest?" But instead of resting, I pretended to be more confused than usual. I started saying nonsensical things, seeming disoriented, acting exactly as they wanted me to act. And while I played my part of the drugged old woman, they played theirs of concerned relatives. "Daniel," Chloe said loudly, "clearly for my benefit, I think we need to call the doctor. Eleanor isn't well. Look at her. She's completely out of it." The doctor arrived that same afternoon. Dr. Ivan Shepard, a 60-year-old man, with a face that looked like it had never smiled in his life. He was obviously the corrupt doctor Arthur had warned me about, the one who was going to certify that I was mentally incapacitated. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said in a voice that tried to be kind but sounded more like an undertaker's, "your family is very worried about you. They say you've been confused, disoriented. How are you feeling?" I don't know," I mumbled, faking the drug's effect. "Everything's blurry. I can't think straight. I see, the doctor said, taking notes in a pad. Do you know what day it is today? Tuesday? I answered, though it was Friday. Do you know where you are? At the house of... I trailed off, looking around as if I didn't recognize the place. The doctor exchanged a meaningful look with Chloe. Mrs. Eleanor, I'm afraid you are experiencing severe cognitive decline. It's common in people your age, especially after traumatic events like the death of a spouse. Severe cognitive decline. The words that would condemn me to a life of legal slavery, if this plan worked. What does that mean? Daniel asked, pretending not to know exactly what it meant. It means Mrs. Eleanor is no longer in a condition to make important decisions for herself, the doctor explained. She needs a legal guardian to handle her financial and medical affairs. Fortunately, you as her family can assume that responsibility. It's a very difficult decision, Chloe said, feigning being overwhelmed, but if it's what's best for Eleanor, it is definitely for the best, the doctor confirmed. I can certify her mental incapacity, and you can proceed with the corresponding legal paperwork. There it was, the trap, sprung. They had drugged me, brought in a corrupt doctor to certify I was insane, and now they were going to steal everything they thought I had. All legal, all official, all perfectly planned, except for one small detail they didn't know about. Arthur had been recording the entire conversation from outside the house. He had professional surveillance equipment that had captured every word, every admission of guilt, every step of their criminal plan. And he wasn't alone. Because while they believed they were closing their trap, mine was just opening. Doctor? I said suddenly, in a voice that was completely clear and lucid. Could you repeat that? You said you're going to certify that I'm mentally incapacitated? The silence that followed was absolute. The doctor turned white. Chloe's jaw dropped. Daniel looked like he was about to faint. Eleanor, Chloe stammered. I thought you were confused. Oh, I'm perfectly clear, I replied, standing up with an energy that froze them all. I'm so clear that I've just recorded this entire conversation. I'm so clear that I've been pretending to be drugged all morning. And I'm so clear on exactly what the three of you have been planning. The doctor tried to get up and leave, but at that moment, the front door opened. In walked Arthur, 2 police officers, and a detective who had been investigating Dr. Shepard's operations. Nobody move, the detective said. You are all under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and attempted kidnapping. Chloe turned to me with a fury that finally showed her true face. You damned old witch. You set us up. That's right, I replied with a smile I had been saving for weeks. I set you up. Just like you set me up. The difference is, my trap worked. As the police cuffed them, Chloe kept screaming. You can't arrest us. We were just trying to take care of her. She's crazy. Ma'am, the detective told her with professional patience. We have recordings of you planning to drug Mrs. Eleanor, of you conspiring with a doctor to have her falsely declared incompetent, and of you threatening to use force if she didn't cooperate. That's not care. That's criminal abuse. Daniel, my own son, looked at me with a mixture of hatred and desperation. Mom, how could you do this to us? We're your family. That's precisely why it hurts so much, I answered. Because when your own family betrays you, when your own son decides you're worth more dead than alive, when the woman you brought into my home tries to poison me, that's not family. That's the enemy. Dr. Shepard tried to negotiate. Mrs. Eleanor, this is a misunderstanding. I was only trying to help. Doctor, Arthur interrupted him, we have evidence that you've been involved in at least 12 similar cases in the last 5 years. Falsifying psychiatric evaluations is a federal crime. You're going to have a lot of time in prison to think about all the help you've given. As they were led away, Chloe screamed one last threat at me. This isn't over, Eleanor. I will find a way to destroy you. But I just smiled. Because what Chloe didn't know was that this was just the beginning. I had won the first battle, but the war wasn't over. And I had $27 million to fund a revenge she would never see coming. When they were finally gone, I was left alone in the house with Arthur. Mrs. Eleanor, he said with admiration, that was brilliant. But are you sure you want to continue? We've caught them. They're under arrest. Arthur, I replied, those 3 are just the tip of the iceberg. How many other seniors are suffering what I was about to suffer? How many other families are robbing their own parents and grandparents? How many other doctors are selling false certificates of incompetence? You're right, he admitted. It's a much bigger problem. Exactly, I said, feeling a resolve I hadn't felt in years. And now I have the resources to do something about it. That night, alone in my own house for the first time in weeks, I took out the bank documents I had kept hidden. $27 million. A fortune my husband had quietly amassed, protecting it from exactly the kind of people who had just been arrested. But now I was going to use that fortune for something he never would have imagined. I was going to use it for a war. The following days were like waking from a nightmare and stepping into a dream. For the first time in months, I could walk through my own house without someone watching me. I could make my own decisions without someone questioning me. I could be myself without having to pretend to be a helpless old woman. But that freedom came with a rage that had been silently growing for weeks. Arthur came to visit the next day with news on the case. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said, reviewing his documents, "Chloe and Daniel are being held without bail. The judge deemed them a danger to the community, especially to vulnerable seniors. Dr. Shepard is also in custody, and his medical license has been suspended indefinitely." "And Price?" I asked. "Price is more complicated," Arthur admitted. "He's a lawyer. He knows the system. He's trying to cut a deal with the prosecutor's office, offering information on other cases in exchange for a reduced sentence." "Other cases?" "Yes. It turns out this operation was much larger than we thought. Price has been working with a network of corrupt doctors, fake social workers, and even some bank employees to identify seniors with money and systematically rob them. That made my blood boil. It wasn't just my case. It was a criminal enterprise that had been destroying the lives of dozens, perhaps hundreds, of older people. "How many victims?" I asked. "So far, we've identified at least 40 cases in the last 3 years, but we believe there are many more." Arthur looked at me with a serious expression. "Mrs. Eleanor, you were lucky. You had the resources and the intelligence to fight back. But many of these victims weren't so fortunate. They lost everything. Their homes, their savings, their freedom. Some were put into institutions against their will. Others simply disappeared. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. "You mean they were killed?" "We can't prove it yet," Arthur answered carefully. "But there are several suspicious deaths. Seniors who died shortly after signing wills that benefited people they barely knew. Deaths that were certified as natural by the very same Dr. Shepard. In that moment, I knew my personal war had become something much bigger. It was no longer just about revenge for what they had done to me. It was about justice for all the victims who never had a chance to defend themselves." "Arthur," I said with a determination that surprised even me, "I want to use my money to destroy this entire network. I want to find every victim. I want to compensate their families. And I want to make sure these people can never do this to another person again. That's going to require a lot of resources," he warned me. "Private investigators, specialized lawyers, maybe even security teams. We could be talking about millions of dollars." "I have 27 million, I reminded him, "and now I know exactly what I'm going to use them for." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Arthur hired the best private investigators in the country. We retained law firms specializing in crimes against the elderly. We set up temporary offices in 3 different cities to coordinate the investigation. And I, for the first time in my life, became the head of an operation that would have made my late husband proud. The results were devastating for the criminal network, but also heartbreaking for me. We found a 72-year-old woman who had been declared incompetent after her niece drugged her for weeks. They had stolen her house and her life savings and had her committed to a nursing home where she was kept permanently sedated so she couldn't complain. We found an 80-year-old man who had signed over power of attorney after his stepson threatened to send him to a psychiatric hospital if he didn't cooperate. They had emptied all his bank accounts and left him living in deplorable conditions in a miserable apartment. We found an elderly couple who had been separated after a professional caregiver convinced them they needed specialized care. They had been put in different institutions, their house had been sold, and neither of them knew where the other was. Each case was more horrific than the last. Each story was a knife to the heart. But it was also fuel for my resolve. But what truly made me explode with fury was when we discovered that Chloe had been planning this since before she even married Daniel. She had researched our family, studied our finances, and calculated exactly how much she could steal. Her marriage to my son hadn't been about love. It had been a long-term business plan. And the worst part was that Daniel knew. My investigators found emails between them from before the wedding, discussing how to handle the mother-in-law problem when the time came. My own son had been planning to rob me from the day he got married. That revelation broke my heart, but it also unleashed something within me that had been contained for far too long. I was no longer Eleanor, the betrayed widow. I was Eleanor, the avenger. Eleanor, the bringer of justice. Eleanor, the woman who was going to use every cent of her $27 million to ensure these criminals paid for every life they had destroyed. But while I was organizing my crusade, they weren't sitting idly in jail. Chloe apparently had more resources than we had imagined. She had managed to contact other members of the criminal network who were still free, and they were planning something to silence me permanently. Arthur arrived at my house one morning with an expression I had never seen on him before. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said without preamble, "we have a problem. Our contacts in the police have informed us that there's a contract out on your life." "A contract?" "Chloe has put a price on your head. $50,000 for anyone who eliminates you before you can testify at the trial. And there are people willing to collect." I was silent for a moment, processing the information. My own daughter-in-law had put a price on my life. The woman who had lived in my house, eaten at my table, and pretended to love me for years, now wanted me dead. "What do you recommend?" I finally asked. "That you leave the country for a while. That you wait until the trial is over and everyone is in prison. That you protect yourself until it's safe to return." But I had a different idea. "No, Arthur, I'm not going to run. I'm going to do the exact opposite." "What do you mean?" I smiled, a smile I had been saving for this exact moment. "I mean, it's time for Eleanor, the invisible old woman, to disappear forever. And it's time for Eleanor, the most dangerous woman in the country, to make her first public appearance." "Mrs. Eleanor? Chloe wants to play with hitmen? Perfect. I have $27 million to hire the best bodyguards in the world. She wants to threaten me? Perfect. I'm going to use those threats to generate national publicity about elder abuse. She wants to silence me? Perfect. I'm going to speak so loudly that the entire country will hear me." Arthur looked at me with a mixture of admiration and terror. "Are you sure about this?" "Arthur," I said, feeling more powerful than I had in my entire life, "I have spent 65 years being invisible. I have spent 65 years letting others make the important decisions. I have spent 65 years being the quiet woman who doesn't bother anyone. And now I have the money, the motivation, and the fury to change the world. And the first thing I'm going to change is the fate of that bitch who dared to threaten my life." It was time for the world to meet the real Eleanor. The transformation began that very afternoon. I hired the best stylists in the city, not to look younger, but to look more powerful. I traded my discreet gray dresses for elegant pantsuits in colors that demanded respect. I hired a security team that had protected politicians and celebrities. And most importantly, I hired the best public relations agency in the country. Mrs. Eleanor, the agency director, a woman named Patricia in her 40s with the sharpest gaze I'd ever seen, told me, "Your story is exactly what this country needs to hear. But we have to tell it the right way. You are not going to be the victim. You are going to be the hero." In 3 days, my story was on every national news channel. "The millionaire widow who brought down an abuse ring," the headlines screamed. "The 65-year-old woman who outsmarted her own scammers. Eleanor Morales, the silent avenger." But I wasn't content with just being a news story. I wanted action. I established the Eleanor Morales Foundation for the Protection of Seniors with an initial donation of $10 million. I hired the country's top lawyers to work exclusively on elder abuse cases. I set up a toll-free hotline where any senior could report abuse. And most importantly, I offered a $1 million reward for information leading to the capture of any member of the criminal network still at large. The results were immediate and spectacular. In 1 week, we had received over 500 calls. In 2 weeks, we had identified 12 more members of the network. In 1 month, we had freed 8 seniors who were being held in institutions against their will. But what truly filled me with satisfaction was seeing Chloe's reaction when she found out what I was doing. Arthur came to see me with a recording of a phone call Chloe had made from jail. He had obtained it legally, of course. Her lawyer had authorized the recording as part of plea negotiations. "That old hag played me," Chloe screamed on the recording. "She made us think she was a poor, helpless old woman, and it turns out she's a multi-millionaire. She has $27 million and never told us a thing." "Chloe, calm down," her lawyer's voice said. "This isn't helping your case." "My case is screwed," she shot back. "Eleanor set the perfect trap. She pretended to be vulnerable so we would make all the mistakes. And now she's using her money to destroy all of us." "Did you know about the money before?" the lawyer asked. "Of course not. If I'd known she had $27 million, I never would have tried to steal $12,000. I would have found a way to steal all of it." That confession made me laugh out loud. Chloe had just publicly admitted that her only mistake was underestimating how much money she could have stolen. She showed not a shred of remorse for the harm she had caused. She was just mad she hadn't stolen enough. But the recording also revealed something more important. Chloe mentioned the names of other network members we hadn't yet identified. Names of people who were still free and still victimizing other seniors. "Arthur," I said after listening to the recording, "I want you to use that information to find every one of those people, and I want you to let them know we're looking for them." "What do you mean?" "I want them to know that Eleanor Morales is hunting them. I want them to know I have unlimited resources and absolute determination. I want them to be afraid." And it worked. In the following weeks, 3 more members of the network turned themselves in, hoping to cut deals with the prosecution. 2 others were arrested trying to flee the country, and one, a doctor who had been falsifying death certificates to cover up murders, was found dead in his home with a suicide note confessing his crimes. The case had become the biggest national scandal of the year. Every news outlet was talking about the elder abuse ring and the vengeance of Eleanor Morales. Politicians from both parties were competing to see who could pass the strictest laws against elder abuse. And I had become the public face of a cause that affected millions of people. But the most satisfying moment of all was when I received a call from the prison. Daniel wanted to talk to me. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking, when we finally met in the visitor's room. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know things would go this far." I looked at him through the reinforced glass, this 35-year-old man who had come from my body and had chosen to betray me in the cruelest way possible. "What exactly are you sorry for, Daniel? Are you sorry for trying to rob me? Or are you sorry you got caught?" "I'm sorry for everything," he replied, and for the first time in years, I saw real tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry I betrayed you. I'm sorry I let Chloe convince me to do something so horrible. I'm sorry I wasn't the son you deserved." "And what do you want me to do with that?" I asked. "I want you to forgive me," he said. "I know I don't deserve it, but you're my mother. You're the only family I have." I was silent for a long moment, studying his face, searching for any sign of the sincerity I had known when he was a boy, searching for some hope that the son I had raised still existed somewhere inside this stranger. "Daniel," I said finally, "I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer with complete honesty. If I hadn't discovered your plan, if you had succeeded in having me declared incompetent and stealing my money, what would you have done with me afterward?" He lowered his head. "We would have taken care of you." "Liar," I cut him off. "What would you have done with me afterward?" A long silence. Very long. "We would have put you in a home somewhere," he finally admitted. "And if I had resisted? If I had tried to escape? If I had tried to tell the truth?" Another silence. Even longer this time. Chloe said. "That there would be ways to keep you calm," he mumbled. "Drugs." "Yes. And if that hadn't worked?" The silence that followed gave me the answer I needed. My own son, the child I had carried for 9 months, whom I had nursed, whom I had cared for when he was sick, whom I had helped with his homework for years, would have had me killed for money. "I understand you perfectly," I said, standing up. "And now you understand this. You no longer have a mother. Eleanor Morales, the woman who raised you, died the day you decided to betray her. The woman you're looking at now is someone completely different. Someone who has no children. Someone who has no family. Someone who dedicates her life to protecting the innocent from people like you. Mom, please. I am not your mom, I said with a coldness that surprised me. I am Eleanor Morales, the woman who made sure you and your wife will spend the rest of your lives in prison. And when you get out, if you ever get out, you will find there is no place in this world where you can hide from the consequences of what you did. I walked out of that prison knowing I had closed a chapter of my life forever. I was no longer the betrayed mother seeking justice. I was something far more powerful and far more dangerous. I was a woman with nothing left to lose and $27 million to see that justice was done. 6 months later, my foundation had grown into the most powerful organization in the country in the fight against elder abuse. We had rescued over 200 seniors from abusive situations. We had gotten 53 criminals arrested. We had successfully lobbied Congress to pass the Eleanor Morales Act, which stiffened penalties for financial abuse of seniors and created a national protection system. But what gave me the most satisfaction was knowing my name had become a nightmare for every abuser in the country. Whenever someone tried to take advantage of an elderly person, the victim or their relatives would say, "I'm going to call Eleanor Morales." And that threat was enough to make most criminals back down. My main office was in a 10-story building I had bought in the city center. From my office on the top floor, I could see the entire city that had once seen me as an invisible old woman. Now they saw me as a force of nature. "Mrs. Eleanor," Patricia said as we reviewed the results of our latest campaign, "we have an interview scheduled with 60 Minutes next week. They want to do a special on your work and the impact it's had across the country." "Perfect," I replied. "Any news on the trial?" "Yes. Chloe and Daniel were sentenced this morning. He received 15 years for conspiracy, fraud, and elder abuse. She received 25 years for the same charges, plus attempted murder for the drugs she put in your drink. 25 years. Chloe would be almost 70 when she got out of prison, if she even lived that long. She would be an old woman, just like the victims she had abused. There was a poetic justice in that which filled me with satisfaction. And Dr. Shepard? 30 years. And his medical license has been permanently revoked. He will never practice medicine again. Price? 12 years. His cooperation with the DA's office helped him, but not much. He also lost his license to practice law. 40 years of my life had been built on trust that these people had tried to shatter. In return, I had taken the rest of their lives. It seemed like a fair trade. That afternoon, while reviewing new cases that had arrived at the foundation, I received a call that changed my life once again. "Eleanor Morales?" A female voice I didn't recognize asked. "Yes. How can I help you?" "My name is Isabella Vargas. I'm an investigative journalist. I've been following your case and the work of your foundation, and there's something I think you should know." "What is it?" "Your husband, Mr. Morales. I think there's more to his story than you know. Could we meet?" Isabella turned out to be a young woman, about 30, with the same determination in her eyes that I had developed. She arrived at my office with a box full of documents and photographs. "Mrs. Eleanor," she said, opening the box, "I've been investigating your husband's financial operations for the last 6 months. What I found is going to change everything you think you know about him." "What do you mean?" "Your husband didn't just have $27 million hidden," she said, pulling out bank statements I had never seen. "He had over 80 million spread across banks in 12 different countries." I was speechless. $80 million. My husband had been far wealthier than I had ever imagined. "But that's not all," Isabella continued. "These funds didn't just come from his import-export business. They came from something much more interesting." She showed me photographs of my husband meeting with men I didn't recognize, documents showing money transfers from organizations I'd never heard of, travel records to countries he had never told me he visited. "Mrs. Eleanor," Isabella said with a gravity that frightened me, "your husband was what we call a financial vigilante. He used his import-export company as a front to investigate and dismantle organized crime networks. The money he left you wasn't just his. It was money he had confiscated from criminals over the years." "Are you saying my husband was some kind of vigilante?" Exactly. And the 27 million you received was just a small part of a much larger fund he had established to continue his work after his death. Isabella pulled out more documents. There's a letter, Mrs. Eleanor. A letter he wrote for you, which was only to be delivered if you proved you were worthy of continuing his mission. Worthy how? By using the money he left you to fight against injustice, protecting the innocent, destroying the criminals who prey on the weak. Isabella smiled at me. I think you've more than proven that. She handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in my husband's handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened it and began to read. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this letter, it means you have proven to be the extraordinary woman I always knew you were. The 27 million was a test. The true resources are waiting for you in the account whose number you will find at the end of this letter. Use them to continue the war I began. Use them to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Use them to be the hero this world needs. With all my love and admiration, your husband, who knew you better than you knew yourself. At the end of the letter was a bank account number and access codes that gave me control over an additional $80 million. Isabella, I said when I finished reading, this is real. Completely real. Your husband had been planning this for years. He knew that one day someone would try to take advantage of you, and he knew that when that happened, you would find the strength to fight back. What he didn't expect was that you would become something far more powerful than he ever was. I sat in silence for several minutes, processing the information. My husband hadn't just left me money. He had left me a legacy, a mission, a war to continue. What are you going to do now? Isabella asked. I smiled, a smile that would have terrified Chloe if she had seen it. I'm going to use every cent of this $107 million to turn this country into a place where no one, ever again, can take advantage of an elderly person. And after that, I'm going to expand the operation internationally. I'm going to create a global network of protection for seniors. I'm going to use the contacts my husband left behind to hunt down criminals on every continent. Aren't you afraid? That's a lot of power for one person. Isabella, I said, standing up and walking to the window from which I could see the entire city. For 65 years, I was invisible. For 65 years, I let others make the important decisions. For 65 years, I was the quiet woman who didn't bother anyone. And now? Now I'm Eleanor Morales. I have $107 million, an international foundation, and the absolute determination to protect every senior in the world. I turned back to her with a smile that held all the fury and all the justice I had accumulated for months. And any criminal who dares to touch an elderly person is going to find out that some bites are fatal. 5 years later, the name Eleanor Morales was known around the world. Not as the old woman who had been a victim of abuse, but as the woman who had completely transformed how society protected its senior citizens. My foundation operated in 37 countries. We had rescued over 5,000 seniors from abusive situations. We had secured the arrest and prosecution of over 2,000 criminals. And we had successfully lobbied 18 countries to pass stricter laws against elder abuse. But what made me proudest was the network of Eleanor's watchdogs that had formed organically. They were seniors from all over the world who had learned to defend themselves, who had developed mutual support systems, who no longer accepted being treated like second-class citizens. We had created a quiet revolution of empowered older people. My office now occupied 3 buildings in the city center. I had a team of over 500 employees working on abuse cases around the globe. And I had established a $1 billion endowment fund that guaranteed this work would continue long after I was gone. That morning, like every morning for the past 5 years, I started my day by reviewing reports of new cases. But there was one that particularly caught my eye. Patricia, I said to my director of operations, this case from Mexico, what do you know about it? It's similar to what happened to you, she replied. A 70-year-old woman whose family is trying to have her declared incompetent to steal her pension and her house. But there's something different about this case. What? The woman's name is Maria Gonzalez. And when her family started pressuring her, she told them, I know Eleanor Morales, and she is going to come for you. I laughed. Does she actually know me? No. But apparently, she saw one of your television interviews and learned your tactics. She's been pretending to be confused while recording all of her family's conversations. She already has enough evidence to have 3 people arrested. Send a team to Mexico, I ordered, and make sure Maria receives all the legal support she needs. They're already on their way, Patricia replied with a smile. And there's something else you should know. What is it? Chloe got out of prison last week. That made me pause. Chloe had served 5 years of her 25-year sentence due to a successful appeal and good behavior. I knew this day would come, but I didn't expect to feel anything. Not fear, not anger, not worry. Just a kind of cold curiosity. Do you know where she is? I asked. Our investigators have been following her. She's living in a small apartment in a poor part of the city, works at a convenience store, lives alone. She seems broken. Broken how? Emotionally, physically, financially. The 5 years in prison were not kind to her, and it seems she found out what you became while she was inside. Apparently, some of the other inmates psychologically tortured her, constantly reminding her that the woman she tried to rob was now one of the most powerful people in the country. That afternoon, for the first time in 5 years, I did something impulsive. I told my driver to take me to the convenience store where Chloe worked. I found her behind the counter, wearing a cheap uniform and an expression of mortal boredom. The 5 years in prison had aged her 20 years. Her hair, once always perfectly coiffed, was now gray and lifeless. Her face, once shining with arrogance and greed, now looked sunken and hopeless. She didn't recognize me at first. I had changed as much as she had, but in the opposite direction. I was wearing a custom-tailored suit that cost more than she made in a year. My hair was perfectly styled by the city's top stylist. I wore jewelry worth more than the house she had once lived in. But when our eyes met, I saw the exact moment she realized who I was. "Eleanor," she whispered, her face turning deathly pale. "Hello, Chloe," I replied, my voice as calm as a winter lake. What are you doing here?" she stammered. "I wanted to see you," I said simply. "I wanted to see what you had become." She looked around nervously, as if expecting bodyguards to appear and arrest her, or worse. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I know what we did was wrong. I've had 5 years to think about it. And, do you know what's most interesting, Chloe?" I interrupted her. "What?" "That if you hadn't betrayed me, if you hadn't tried to steal from me, if you hadn't put drugs in my drink and tried to have me declared insane, I would have died being exactly what you thought I was. An invisible, helpless, old woman." She didn't answer. She just stared at me with a mixture of terror and confusion. "But thanks to you," I continued, "I became something so much more powerful. Thanks to your betrayal, I discovered I had the capacity to be a warrior. Thanks to your cruelty, I found my true purpose in life. Eleanor, please." "No," I cut her off again. "I'm not going to hurt you, Chloe. I'm not going to send you back to prison. I'm not going to ruin the pathetic little life you've built here. No, because you're no longer important enough to me to dedicate another second of my time." I took an envelope from my purse and placed it on the counter. "But I want you to have this." "What is it?" "A check for $10,000. Her eyes widened in shock. "Why?" "Because I want you to live a long life, Chloe. I want you to live for many, many years. I want you every day to wake up and remember that the woman you tried to destroy became one of the most powerful women in the country. I want every time you see my name in the news, every time you hear about the Eleanor Morales Foundation, every time someone mentions the laws I changed and the lives I saved, you remember that it all exists because you underestimated me." I took the check and put it directly into her hand. "This money isn't charity, it's my investment in your misery. Because every time you spend it, you will remember that it came from the woman you defeated without even realizing it." I walked out of that store, knowing I had closed the final chapter of my old life. Chloe was no longer my enemy. She was just an old woman working in a convenience store, living with the weight of knowing she had lost the most important war of her life. That night, sitting in my office overlooking the city lights, I reflected on the incredible journey my life had been. It had begun as Eleanor the Invisible, the old woman no one noticed. It had passed through Eleanor the victim, the woman betrayed by her own family. Then I had become Eleanor the Avenger, the woman who destroyed her enemies. And finally, I had transformed into Eleanor the hero, the woman who protected the innocent around the world. But more than all of that, I had become Eleanor the free. Free from society's expectations of what a woman my age should be. Free from the need to be loved by people who didn't deserve me. Free from living a small, quiet life. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Patricia. "Mrs. Eleanor," she said, excitement in her voice. "I just got a call from Sweden. They want to nominate you for the Nobel Peace Prize for your work in protecting the rights of senior citizens." I smiled. The Nobel Peace Prize. For a woman who had started this war as an act of personal revenge. "You know what, Patricia?" I said. "What?" "I think I'll accept. But only if I can use my acceptance speech to send a message to every abuser in the world." "What message?" "That some old women bite. And that when we bite, the wound is fatal." I hung up the phone and looked out the window one last time. Somewhere in that city, there were seniors being abused at this very moment. Somewhere in the world, families were plotting to steal from their own parents and grandparents. Somewhere, criminals thought that old people were easy prey. But I also knew that somewhere, there was an old woman who was refusing to be a victim. There was a grandmother recording her grandchildren's threats. There was a widow calling the police, instead of suffering in silence. Because I had shown that it was possible. I had shown that it is never too late to fight back. I had shown that age can be a mask for ferocity, and that gray hair can hide very sharp fangs. And that, I thought as I turned off the lights in my office, was the most perfect revenge of all. I hadn't just destroyed my enemies. I had inspired an entire generation of seniors not to let themselves be destroyed. Some bites, after all, are contagious.